Most valuable player who was the weakest link. First to someone we haven't heard from much in a while, but someone who has been part of our political life for nearly 30 years. Bronwyn Bishop rose to the position of Speaker of the House after the last election, but left the job after scandal over her use of a taxpayer-funded helicopter to get from Melbourne to Geelong for a party fundraiser. Bronwyn Bishop wanted to recontest her seat of Mackellar, but lost Liberal Party pre-selection. Tonight, Bronwyn Bishop breaks her silence. A very good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Evening to you.
Let me cut straight to the chase here on this helicopter. When you stepped on the helicopter to fly from Melbourne to Geelong, what were you thinking?
Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and it was probably a pretty dumb thing to do.
But at the time, what was in your mind?
In the time, it was to get to the function, to be there on time, to speak about the role of the Speaker, as I'd been doing all over the country. It's much more than just sitting up in the chair and presiding over the chamber. There's a diplomatic role to it, there's running departments, there's security of the House, lots of things.
But you knew this was a fundraiser though, didn't you?
Yeah, I know. When you say it's a fundraiser, I think some people think it was lots of money. I think it was like $75. It was pretty ordinary mums and dads attending.
Right. But it's nonetheless, the purpose of it is a fundraiser, and this is a taxpayer-funded flight. You can understand why it caused the outrage that it did.
Yes.
And going just from Melbourne to Geelong, normal people drive, takes an hour. Surely it must have clicked at the time that this is not right.
Yeah, it did.
So you knew that at the time?
Well, I do now with hindsight. It was just that we had to get there, the time constraints were there, but as I said, it was a pretty dumb thing to do.
Well, it turned into quite a storm after the story broke, which was, of course, sometime later. What happened then? Did Tony Abbott or someone in his office call you in and say, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? What actually happened?
Well, there was a lot of discussion, wasn't there? There was a lot of discussion about what other people had done and what other people had taken aeroplane rides to Spain or whatever. And it became, I think, a very messy period. But there were lots of people who were very supportive, and as I said, it was a time which, hindsight, should never have occurred.
You decided...
And that is indeed why I repaid the money.
Well, you did, you paid it back, but you decided at the time to tough it out, hold on to your job as Speaker, and obviously Tony Abbott, as Prime Minister, was backing you in initially as well.
Initially, yes.
Initially. He I think, said that you were on probation, were his words, while there was an investigation into other travel claims. But something changed. Something changed because you eventually decided to go.
Yes, well, when Tony asked me to resign himself, I did, to protect him.
So he flat out said, he asked you to resign?
That day.
And how did that conversation go? Were you were willing to go when he asked you?
Well, as I said, it was to protect him, and I did. So that's it. But it's kind of yesterday's news, and rehashing it doesn't change it. As I said, it was a dumb thing to do. I did repay the money.
But this is also a fascinating relationship between the two of you that goes way back. I mean, he described...
I've always liked Tony.
Well,
always.
indeed, and he described you, and he's described himself famously as the love child of Bronwyn Bishop and John Howard.
I always said it was an immaculate conception.
OK, but then he's obviously asked you to resign. I'm told you didn't actually agree to go at that point, that it took the likes of Alan Jones and others to convince you to go.
No, when Tony Abbott asked me to go himself, that's when I resigned.
All right, so you did eventually go. You did say in your valedictory speech that I was asked to resign for Tony Abbott, who I'd assisted and worked with and respected for many years, but there's much more than meets the eye in this saga, but not for now.
Still not for now.
Still not for now.
We've got an election that's raging. We've got so many more issues that are important to discuss. It's not all about me.
No, I'd like to get to that, but that does indicate there's, well, as you say, more than meets the eye in this saga.
There's always two sides to a story, isn't there?
What are we missing, though? Tony Abbott asks you to resign, you resign. Is it what's missing from this puzzle?
Well, as I said, it's not all about me. This is an election. This is about the future of Australia. This is about who's going to govern. This is about much more important things.
All right,
things I'd like to talk about.
But I do just need to cover all of this off. You then, when you resigned the speakership, there was a party room meeting to elect your replacement, Tony Smith. And there was a very famous image after that party room meeting. You walk out, Tony Abbott gives you a kiss on the cheek, and you had
expected.
Well, you had a rather stony look on your face at that point. What was going through your mind then?
That was most unexpected.
The party room decision or the kiss on the cheek?
Kiss on the cheek.
Why is that?
Well, it was.
Because of what had happened?
Well, as I said, it's old news now. It happened. There are always, as I said, more than one side of a story, but it's not all about me. It's about what happens in this country. It's about the issues that we're going to discuss. It's about the future government for this country. And I'm as passionate as I ever was about the principles of free enterprise and the philosophy of individualism and those issues which I certainly want to see put into place.
Sure, and absolutely, but you must acknowledge and accept that a lot of people still have questions about all that went on because you didn't talk much at the time about it.
That was a sensible thing to do, don't you think?
Well, all right, but you obviously still don't want to talk much about that time in terms of your relationship with Tony Abbott and what happened there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Okay. Will you ever?
Oh, I'll have to wait and see.
All right. You enjoyed the job as Speaker of the House?
Enormously. Enormously. As I said, it was a very wide-ranging job. There was maintaining order in the House, but I never used the term order, actually. But it was more than that. There was the whole security issues about this building, and coming in tonight, when it's dark and vacant, I saw many of the security issues that I'd put in place, really, together with my colleague, the President of the Senate.
Indeed, you had to be signed in and escorted through the building.
Indeed.
Even as the former Speaker.
Even as the former
All right,
Speaker.
so it can't have been easy for you then to give up the job.
It also had an important diplomatic role. And the room that was adjacent to my office, called the Ambassador's Lounge, was called just that because one had to receive all ambassadors after they'd given their credentials. And then there was work to be done subsequent to that as well.
So, I mean, giving up this job can't have been easy for you.
Of course not.
Now, there was obviously anger towards you over the helicopter and so on, but then it seems there's a lot more anger or anger in different quarters over the leadership ballot that took place in September. Did you vote for Malcolm Turnbull or Tony Abbott?
Well, the world seems to have made up its mind about who I voted for, so
here's your opportunity.
Why don't we just move on?
Now, here's your opportunity. Did you vote for Malcolm Turnbull?
Well, as I said, the world's decided how I voted, so...
Is the world right?
Well, it doesn't matter what I say, they've made a decision. So
we're the only one, presumably, who knows. Are you willing to share who you voted for in the leadership?
As I said, the decision that everybody thinks they know how I voted, so let's leave it like that.
All right, you don't want to clear it up or clarify it at all?
I think it's adequate.
Okay. Well, after that leadership ballot, you then, of course, had some difficulties in winning your pre-selection in your seat. And, you know, years ago, that would have been unthinkable that Bronwyn Bishop would have difficulties in the seat of McKellar. But you wanted to recontest, but you didn't win the pre-selection. Why do you think that is?
Well, the way the pre-selection was structured is it was one half the locals, one half the outsiders. And the locals stuck with me, the outsiders didn't. So had I had a plebiscite, which some people had wanted to have, I'd probably still be there.
Why do you think the outsiders, as you call them, didn't want you?
Well, because they had a preferred candidate.
And, well, you had been a factional player over the years, surely.
Oh, involved, yes. But I'd kept very much factions out of my electorate. I didn't think it was good for the electorate and kept it out. But, of course, the faction plays exist. They exist in all parties. They exist in newsrooms. There's always people who gather together.
Do you think the perception, at least, that you didn't vote for Tony Abbott hurt you in that pre-selection?
What hurt me was that it was an equal number of outsiders as it was locals. The locals wanted me to stay, the outsiders had a different view.
All right, but you don't think your vote in the leadership ballot hurt you?
I think that the structure of the pre-selection is what defeated me. Had I had a plebiscite and all the locals were voting, I think I'd still be there.
So this perception that Tony Abbott had stuck with you through this scandal over the helicopter and then you voted against him in the leadership, and that was all the commentary at the time, was that fair or unfair? Well,
the commentary got very, very pointed, didn't it? And I really did appreciate the one big article that came from your colleague, and I guess to be my future colleague, in Andrew Bolt, when he wrote a big full-page piece that said Bronwyn Bishop was held to a standard we don't hold anyone else to. And if you look around at all the stories that kind of died away, I guess that was pretty true, and I appreciated the article.
Now, why did you want pre-selection again? Why did you want to stick around in Parliament?
To serve the people of Mackellar, which I really, really enjoy. I'm still doing a lot of electorate work, only I don't call it electorate work now, it's community work.
And you'll keep doing that, do you think?
Oh, yes, I'll still stay involved with the organisations. And obviously I'm still very involved with things like the Sydney International Piano Competition, which is about to start on the 6th of July, with 32 of the world's best pianists coming to Australia.
Sounds terrific.
Fantastic.
But did you ever see a political revival for yourself if you were re-elected? Did you ever want to return to the front bench or want to return to the Speaker's job?
Look, I made a couple of statements that I think were very important, and that is that we have a huge percentage of the electorate now which are seniors. And those people often get sort of left off the discussion tag. And I made the point that when you get older and more experienced in life, that you tend to think it's not about the next rung on the ladder, it's not about winning the next contest for a spot. It's about looking at the whole picture. What's good for the country? How are we going to serve the people? How do we make the principles of free enterprise work for this country? How do we focus on individuals to make sure life is good for them? And you take a different perspective, and I thought there was need for that, because the number of people who will be over 65 in the Parliament next time will be practically nil in the House.
And it's important to have over 65s.
It's very important to
I want to come back to aged care, because there's been a budget cut there that both sides are now supporting, and it hasn't had a lot of attention. But I'll come back to that. Malcolm Turnbull, let's just look at the current state of play. Malcolm Turnbull, he took over from Tony Abbott, was very popular. Now he's, well, if you believe the polls, fighting for his political survival against Bill Shorten. Why do you think that is? Was it inevitable, or do you buy the theory that people have been disappointed by Malcolm Turnbull on a few issues? What's going on?
Look, I think whenever your ratings soar, as Malcolm's did, that it's inevitable they come off the boil. You just have to accept that that's the way it goes. And perhaps I would have thought maybe Malcolm would have gone to the polls earlier. But he had things he wanted to do, obviously, and has gone to the polls later. I don't accept that he's fighting for his political life against Bill Shorten. I think
you think he'll win? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And win easily?
Well, I think he'll win comfortably.
Yeah.
Yes.
At the moment, there's a lot of focus, particularly this week, on the superannuation changes.
Indeed.
And there's some anger in the ranks on this as well. Do you detect that? Can you understand that?
Look, normally when you discuss superannuation, the eyes start to glaze over because people just don't understand it. It is hugely a complicated issue. Now, what the government has done is said, OK, when Peter Costello said that all income streams in the pension phase are going to be tax-free, we were doing very nicely as a country. And it's right that you share with the people the prosperity. But when you lock it in, there's always going to be a downturn, and it's difficult. It's maybe if it had been a bit more like a business where you say we're having a fantastic year, here's a bonus. Next year we're not having such a good year, no bonus. But I think it was reasonable that you had to look at the way in which that tax-free status remained. And so what the government has done is to see that some of the pulling back to live within our means that people are going to have to pay a bit more tax.
Have you heard, though, that some MPs do say privately, donors to the Liberal Party have withdrawn funds over this issue?
I have not heard that, except I've seen it reported, but I certainly haven't heard it from any
And the
colleagues.
other complaint is that there wasn't party room consultation on this. You were in that party room meeting,
Yes, indeed.
budget night, I assume.
Yes, but you don't discuss a budget
right
through the party room. You can't do that.
So it wasn't really discussed.
The outline of what was going to occur certainly is given. That's the purpose of having that meeting before the Treasurer goes in and gives that speech. But it's important that you realise that Treasurers and Prime Ministers and Ministers have to take decisions which, if they're out in the open, some of them, before the budget comes down,
but you can
give an
I mean,
advantage to some.
You can understand why MPs, if they're not given a chance before an election to discuss something in the party room, they're going to want to discuss it after the election, aren't they? They're going to want to have a debate about it.
Always discussion.
And they should feel entitled to have an opportunity to push back on something if it's really a big concern to them.
Well, that's nothing untoward about that.
So do you think post-election these superannuation changes will end up being amended, changed, redrawn?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's been pretty steadfast about that, that it'll be presented in legislation and it'll be debated and go through.
Yep. That will be a test of his authority, I suppose, if he does have pressure from the party room on this, an early test for him after the election.
Well, I've been privy to seeing some polling on this issue, which shows that really it's not perhaps as people aren't as focused on it as perhaps reporting of some people being focused on is.
What about the broad theme of the campaign? Because let's face it, on superannuation, the two sides aren't that far apart. The big differences, though, in this campaign are about company tax cuts from the government versus more spending from Labor.
Yes.
How do you think that is going to play out in this campaign, or is playing out so far in this campaign?
I think it's really starting now to be seen for what it is. That, pardon me, what the Prime Minister is showing and saying is, here is our plan that says if you give tax cuts to business, business will reinvest that money in the business, which generates more productivity, employs more people, hence growth and jobs. The answer that Mr Shorten is giving is to say we're going to spend more money on education and health, and that's going to create growth and jobs. Well, no, it's not. You can say that it's, and we all say it's very important to have a well-skilled workforce. But in fact, our education outcomes have been declining, not increasing. And throwing money at it hasn't solved the problem. So when you look at that, it isn't a plan to deal with the economy at all. It's simply a plan to spend money.
Nonetheless, people often say they like more spending. They want more spending on education, on health. Where do you think Labor is going to win ground on these issues?
Traditionally, if you look at whatever polling you ever do, you will see that Labor likes to talk about education and health. You will see that on the government side that there's a strength in how to run the economy, how to run the country. And that's, I mean, it was Bill Clinton who said it's the economy, stupid, didn't he? And it remains true. If you don't get the economy right, you can't afford everything else. So if you can't manage it and get good outcomes for everybody, then you can't afford to have all the things that you'd like to spend money on. But swimming lessons, I ask you.
Now, finally, it is hard to believe that 3 years ago you were, just after the election, becoming the Speaker. You've been in the Parliament since 1987. Is it difficult for you not to be involved this time?
Well, I'm not on the road. To be in truth, I have been involved in campaigns since 1980. I think when I first got my big role to play in a campaign.
In the Young Liberals?
Yes, it was in those very early days, and I was given the job of allocating ministers round to speaking appointments and so on. So that was my beginning. So not to be having to jump out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning and catch the 6 o'clock whatever flight to wherever and do 3 cities a day, I won't miss that travel. But the opportunity to talk about things that are important will still be with me, and I'm very much looking forward to being part of this team.
Well, your electoral neighbour Tony Abbott is, of course, going around again, or seeking election again in his seat of Warringah. Do you think that's a good idea, and why do you think Tony Abbott is wanting another term?
Well, I haven't asked him. I don't know whether you have. He's made that decision.
Oh, look, I have, but you've known him a long time. What, you haven't spoken to him for a while?
Not other than say, g'day.
How is that? So that relationship is obviously still a bit frosty?
Well, I guess we haven't been in the same place with the same aims at any particular point in time in recent times.
Or maybe you'll run across him through the course of this campaign, or even here on Sky
Look,
News.
I did see one of his opponents being interviewed, I think, by
Andrew Bolt just
Andrew
earlier.
Bolt,
Yep.
a little earlier. I think if you're a betting person, you wouldn't be putting your money there, you'd be putting your money on Tony Abbott.
Bronwyn Bishop, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll have to leave it there, but look forward to your contributions over the weeks ahead.